Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today for a threat briefing on our new deep dive research centered on the financial services sector. In today's conversation, we'll be spotlighting something that's particularly prevalent in the financial services area, the insider threat. My name is Julie Vickery Kirsten. I am the Global Events and Marketing Manager here at Trustwave and will be your host. I'd like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items so you can get the most out of today's session. If you are viewing this session live, our webinar platform allows you to customize your viewer screen. Feel free to adjust the size and positioning of the different windows to accommodate your liking. We do recommend that you use Chrome as the browser of choice. If you have any problems with the audio or session delivery, I always recommend that you hit refresh. I promise you will not need to re-log in, and the system should overcome any connectivity issues. Today's webinar will include both a presentation and a question and answer session. You will find the questions window in your webinar screen, and we encourage you to enter the questions as you think of them throughout the presentation, and we'll address as many as possible at the end. Lastly, today's presentation will be recorded, and I'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone with a link to that recording. A copy of the recording will be made available on demand on our website for future reference. Before we dive in, I would like to welcome our expert today, Sean Kennedy. Sean is the Senior Director of Spider Labs Threat Hunt and Intelligence at Trustwave with over 20 years of experience in IT and security. He leads the team by example by applying his deeper knowledge to create industry best practices. Without further ado, let's get started. Sean, over to you.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks everyone for joining me today in this webinar on insider threat. I appreciate the time that you're putting in to watch this webinar. This particular research is part of a larger series of Trustwave Spider Labs reporting released on the distinctive cybersecurity risks encountered in the financial services sector. Today's conversation will focus on insider threat. We'll discuss the growing danger of insider threats to financial institutions and highlight effective strategies to prevent and detect them. But I'd like to note additionally that we do have other reports available to you. We have an overarching financial services sector report. We call it the Risk Radar Report. We also have a deep dive on phishing-as-a-service, and of course this one, insider threat, with a larger deep dive report, very detailed. Please feel free to check the QR code, and that should bring you to the appropriate resources. So let's dig in. In a recent report by Securonics, it's been proven that the insider threat has gained an uptick 40% year over year. And this is particularly interesting because oftentimes insider threat isn't necessarily reported. And they're saying that the cost of insider threat incidents is also increasing, a staggering 5 million. And when you couple that with your typical incident response investigations or breach compromise efforts, those numbers can skyrocket. And it's important to note when looking at numbers like these that these are of reported incidents. I can assure you that these numbers are likely very high and higher than what's shown here. And I would also like to add that, you know, oftentimes when we're looking at breach reports or reporting statistics such as these, those incidents and compromises could potentially be miscategorized. So that's something that would play a factor in any of these numbers. So while 40% is high, I imagine it's a lot higher. So taking a look at insider threat, what exactly is insider threat? It's a big overarching category, and we can break it down into an intentional insider threat and unintentional insider threat. Well, what is that? Intentional insider threat, generally what we're talking about there is your malicious insiders, personnel that may be working at your organization that are intentionally trying to do something bad for whatever reason that might be, whether that's for financial gain or they're disgruntled, but generally they're trying to cause some form of harm, destruction, damage. And that can be anything from allowing attackers in, or it could be just destroying data or even leaking data. unintentional insider threat is a little harder to define. There's so much there within unintentional insider threat, and really what we're talking about could be something as simple as end users clicking on a link from an email or downloading an attachment that is actual malware. It could be, which is accidental, by the way, or it could be something as simple as misconfigurations, negligence, compliance, things of those nature could be or is categorized as an unintentional insider threat. Oftentimes, when you're reading the news wire about breaches, whether it's ransomware or some APT threat actor, we often break those down into how did the attacker get in? And you will see things such as phishing is the number one threat vector. Well, phishing is a tactic or technique that a threat actor may employ to get that initial access, but it's the insider, the end user personnel, that's being social engineered to click the link. So that's that accidental, unintentional insider threat that we have to be wary of. And this could also contribute to the miscategorization or reporting on those numbers that we discussed before. So let's dig in a little bit. Let's start with the malicious insider threat. So this one, again, it's pretty obvious what a malicious insider threat may be. We're talking about end users, personnel that have keys to the castle. They're the most important assets within our company. And in the financial services institution, you have a lot at stake here. There's from PII to financial information, credit card data, lending information. There's all sorts of information. You may be working with companies that may be doing an IPO, so there's a lot of confidential information. And so insiders here have a lot of access potentially to confidential information. And this makes it very lucrative for threat actors to sort of coerce insiders into allowing them in or doing something nasty. And certainly financial gain is probably the biggest motivator, I would say. Just like any given threat actor out there that is trying to get access, they're certainly motivated by financial gain. A lot of it's opportunistic. And, just as they are humans, human nature, financial gain is oftentimes that root cause driver of doing something evil. That comes, humans are humans. So people may have, extreme bills they need to pay, or somebody's in the hospital and they need money, and it just becomes, unfortunately, a motivation factor to allow threat actor access potentially, or do something evil, or they're just disgruntled and angry at their job or what have you. They're working too hard, not getting paid enough, and they just want to cause damage. Another one that we don't necessarily always talk about or hear about is those third-party contractors, right? So they might have temporary access to assets within the environment that has confidential information, and those particular folks may not necessarily have gone through the same amount of scrutiny or background check as your normal personnel might have. And so this becomes very interesting from a threat vector perspective. Think of your contract worker who's working on your electricity, or your HVAC person, where they may have physical access to devices. Easily enough, they could just plug in a USB drive that has malware on it. And again, often overlooked as they have access to assets that may have critical data on it, and they may not go through that same level of scrutiny. Recruiting of insiders is rampant. We do see that quite a bit in our research. It's very easy to find dark web postings of threat actors that are looking to, they'll offer Bitcoin or some other crypto coin to stay anonymous, and they advertise very openly to insiders. They're looking for access. They may have specific targets they're looking for. And certainly the financial services sector offers something lucrative for them when we're talking about potential money gain. And interestingly enough, a group called Lapsus, this group at its beginnings were teenagers, 13 to 16 years old. And I think they probably are the ones that made it pretty popular, or at least known to the public, that they were actively recruiting insiders to just install a remote access software for 10 minutes, 5 minutes. They don't need very much time to just have a quick access, drop in a backdoor file that allows them access without that end user's credentials, and they're off to the races. So it gets very tricky in watching and navigating these things. They'll even go out to LinkedIn and other areas to social engineer someone or coerce someone into providing that access. They may go as far as doing some open source intelligence gathering on someone or doing background checks on folks to understand what their motivations might be in doing some financial crime or something like that in order to coerce them into doing what they want. So it gets real tricky, real muddy waters there, but very interesting tactics from a threat actor's perspective in gaining access to critical systems. So what can we do about this? It's interesting. There's a lot of ways to help mitigate, and with remote workforce, this makes it a little bit tougher. But when we're talking about, let's say, disgruntled workers, for instance, this is a good example where, in a pre-COVID world, when most people were working in the office, it would be a little bit easier to see the signs of someone who's disgruntled and may potentially cause harm. They're talking at the water cooler about how angry they are, and a little tip off to an IT staff person to, hey, this person might be thinking about doing something bad, is a little bit easier. In today's modern day, post-COVID, a lot of remote workforce, watching for those physical behaviors may be more difficult, certainly. But what we could do is look for behaviors of users. So for instance, if we have end user personnel who are expected to be working from a certain shift, but we're seeing now that they're logging, if they're working 9 to 5, and now we're seeing them logging in consistently at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., that might be a sign or a trigger to start monitoring that behavior. What are they doing at that time? They shouldn't be working. Enhanced vetting process is certainly another way. I would say that most companies are doing their background checks already, and in the financial services industry, that's probably already heightened. But taking a look at those third-party contractors or vendors, you may want to increase your vetting processes there, as they may have that temporary access to critical systems. Access controls is very important. Generally speaking, when you have a new hire, you set up access controls. In a mature organization, you would set up access controls appropriately. But oftentimes what happens is, as a person progresses in their career, they may have accesses that are staying with them. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have a teller at a bank, and they have specific access to certain things, only the things that they're allowed to have access to. After a couple of years, they move into mortgages department or something like that. Now they have additional accesses to other things. Sometimes those access controls stay with them, so all of their teller accesses they still have. So having proper auditing controls over what they have access to at all times is very important, especially as you have longer tenured employees who may have gathered a bunch of or additional accesses to critical data over time. Security training, most companies again here do this on hire or yearly after that. But conducting regular security awareness training is good, especially when it comes to just bringing awareness to the fact that every end user is a target for coercion. This is very important. We often train end users to not click on links or to notify the IT department if something bad has happened and things of that nature. But how often are we training them on coercion and espionage and those types of things, because certainly everyone is a target, especially in the financial services industry. As part of that, I'd like to just skip to the reporting structure for those types of events. It's very important to create a safe channel for those communications to happen. Again, somebody may have a sordid background. Let's say you have a personnel who has some history, and potentially a threat actor may look into the history of somebody at your organization and use that as leverage to get them to do something bad. This person may not want to openly talk about those things. So having a safe channel to report that without scrutiny is certainly important, and really should be rewarded, I would say. Rewarded in the fact that they're reporting it, they're open and honest, and it could really save the day at the end. And then lastly, incident response plans. Obviously, this is number one when you're dealing with insider threat or malicious insider threat, specifically where human personnel is the problem. So HR needs to be well aware on how to handle those situations. There may be legal involved. So running tabletops on those types of cases, those use cases is very important to just have an understanding all around, from the IT department to security department, but again, HR and legal as well, on how they work together to investigate potential insider threat, especially from like a disgruntled employee perspective. So now let's talk about the unintentional insider threat. Again, this can be very broad. As I mentioned before, we're talking about missed patches, clicking a link that brings us to nefarious websites, or just I hate to say negligence, but maybe complacency is a better term. Certainly as businesses grow and get bigger, or IT specifically is in the business of keeping the business running, and sometimes shortcuts are made. And these are accidental insider threats. Nothing is meant to be malicious by any stretch of the imagination, but these things do lend themselves to breach down the line. Just recently, our Spider Labs threat hunt team organized a threat hunt around insider threat. And as you can see, here's the MITRE attack frame in that diagram. And we looked at 37 TTPs, or tactics, techniques, and procedures that would probably be used to employ like insider threat activity, or things that we could look at to find risk in those categories. What's interesting is that while we ran this hunt campaign across all of our customers, specifically speaking on financial services customers that we had, 48% of our risk-based findings came from remote access software. So this is, again, this can be a problem with access, allowing access externally. We also saw protocol tunneling. I'll explain what that is in a little bit. And another threat factor that we noticed is exfiltration over physical medium. In this case, it's USB drives. And we'll talk about the mitigations for all of these. So remote monitoring and management tools, RMM tools, as we call them, they come in many forms. There's a lot of applications. Most common ones that we see: LogMeIn, TeamViewer, AnyDesk, BombGuard, SecureLink would be another one. These are all legitimate tools. And there's many reasons why they may be in use. They may be in use by your IT department. They may be in use by a third party that needs access temporarily to systems to do maintenance or something else. The problem is that we're seeing a lot of these remote access tools in a single environment, or even on a single system. In some cases, we found single systems that had 3 or more RMM tools installed on them. Why is this a problem? Well, there's a number of reasons why we're looking for it from a threat hunt perspective. we are looking obviously for exploitation. We're looking for threat actors that may be using this software, which they do. For instance, a lot of the ransomware groups will do social engineering tactics to get you to download like an AnyDesk. They'll capture remote access and then deploy malicious software. From unintentional insider threat, this and complacency, really allowing all of these remote access tools can be a problem. And certainly, just as a threat actor may come in or social engineer to install them, they may find other ways in the environment without phishing, and they will drop their own remote access software that's legitimate. And when there's so many in the environment already, it becomes easier to masquerade. So some strategies to reduce this risk is eliminate all of them, allow for one. So let's say LogMeIn is your tool of choice, then only allow for that. Put in policies and procedures to just allow that software. And anything else should raise a detection alert or just block them entirely. This will help. So let's say LogMeIn is your tool of choice, and now you get an alert that TeamViewer was installed. Well, you already know that you have a policy in place that this is unauthorized software, number one. Number two, it could be a threat actor, could be a tip-off to a threat actor doing bad things. Or number three, in that case of the malicious insider, it could be someone that is allowing that access. So that's one way. Another thing that should be noted, in the case where some other tool needs to be used, if you have LogMeIn and AnyDesk needs to be used by a third party, allow that temporarily and then uninstall it completely. This is the best case because now you don't have software that's listening for connections. And then lastly, multi-factor authentication anywhere you can, especially where remote access is required. The next one is a little bit like RMM tools, but personal VPN software. We see this all the time where what we classify as personal VPN software, the WireGuards, NordVPN, ExpressVPN. Generally, most companies have their authorized VPN package. Let's use Cisco AnyConnect as an example of that. It's very common. But then we'll see these personal VPN softwares, and generally people are using those to evade access controls like web filtering, right? So I want to go to these websites, the company disallows, I can just install ExpressVPN, and now I can get around those controls that traffic isn't necessarily seen. And this becomes another avenue that threat actors may take advantage of to exfiltrate data. They may install their own. And again, just like in the RMM tool situation, if you already have a plethora of VPN softwares, they can masquerade since it's already sort of an accepted allowance of these tools. So the mitigations are similar to RMM tools. Authorize only one VPN solution. Let's say that's Cisco AnyConnect, then block everything else. If you can't block everything else, then create detection rules that whereby anytime any one of these other ones is seen, it's an immediate alert. Because again, it could be an unintentional insider threat. Oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to install that. Or it could be a malicious insider, or threat actor is in your environment and they're deploying that so they can exfiltrate data without being detected. DLP tooling is also a really good element here to do data loss prevention in case there's exfiltration, and it will be seen by that DLP tooling. The last one I want to touch on, and this may be a point of contention for a lot of companies, is the usage of USB drives. Certainly, business case can be made to use them from a security strategy. It's probably better to just disallow USB altogether. We've certainly seen an uptick in USB-borne malware. Mustang Panda, there's been some write-ups recently in the news about variations on their latest malware. We've seen Plug X being used. It comes on a USB stick, you plug it in, and it will run like a worm and install itself, self-propagate. We also have seen Raspberry Robin. But again, here with the unintentional insider, as a company, you don't know where they're getting these USB drives. They may be ordering it from eBay. They may be getting it from their kid's school. They can come from anywhere. And so this becomes a little bit of a risk when they're just allowed to use them carte blanche. And so disabling them entirely is one way to go about mitigating that risk. However, there may be business needs. So one way to help with that is enforce an on-demand USB access. So personnel would have to request access to a USB, and then actually supplying the USB drive may be critical. So you get them from a safe place, and you issue those, you have the serial numbers, and you can monitor the behavior that way. DLP, again, can save the day when looking at critical access to data. We don't want to see any confidential data going onto USB sticks that can then be transferred elsewhere. And enforcing data classification is very important. So classifying your data as non-critical or critical, and allowing those access controls to do what they're supposed to do. So as an end user, I should not be allowed, if I have access to critical data that's categorized as such, classified, I should not be allowed to put that on a USB drive. So that wraps up Insider Threat. Please do take a look at the resources where we have a deep dive report, very detailed report on insider threat, both intentional and unintentional. But with that, I will turn it over to questions.
All right. Thank you, Sean. And as a reminder, you will be receiving a copy of the webinar recording via email by the end of the week, along with a link to download the briefing. If you're interested in learning more about today's topic, you can submit a request by clicking on the mail icon at the bottom of your screen. And don't forget to sign up for the last session in our series, Phishing-as-a-Service Tactics. If you haven't already, you can do that in the module on the bottom right hand of your screen as well. All right, Sean, we've got a couple of questions that have come through, but please, everybody, continue to submit your questions, and we will get to as many as we can before the end of the session. All right, Sean, let's see. The first question is, how effective do you think employee training programs are in mitigating insider threats?
That's a good question, and it's a really hard one to answer. Security awareness training definitely has its pros and cons, and it's hard to measure effectiveness of employee training programs, but it doesn't mean that we should stop doing the training. I think that raising awareness and getting people to understand where, what risks they present to the organization is super important, and getting them to understand that they are also a target, and they have accesses to critical data, and what is the potential ramifications of that, of allowing a threat actor to get access to that data. And then just a double tap on the secure channels. I think along with awareness training on the threat that's out there, awareness training on those groups that are actively recruiting for insiders, I think it's important there to advocate that secure channel of communication where personnel may feel at risk or at harm because someone is talking to them and getting really close and asking certain types of questions. I think it's very important to work through what that looks like, if someone is just chatting them up and potentially recruiting them.
All right, let's see the next question. When do you think the risk of insider threat in financial services, why do you think the risk of insider threat in financial services is so heightened?
Another good question. So insider threat definitely spans across all industries, 100%. But financial services, obviously, there's a lot at stake. Maybe more at stake in financial services just because the type of data that's available. And again, as insiders have more and more access over time to that critical data, it's very important to understand from a security team or an IT team who has access to what and when. Again, a lot is at stake in the financial services sector. There's PII information, credit card data, confidential information, business to business type information, lender information. There's so much at stake there. And all of that is a treasure trove for threat actors.
All right, and it looks like we actually just hit our time. So if you have any additional questions that come to mind before I close out, feel free to enter them into the chat window and we will follow up with you. Before we leave though, I would really appreciate if you would take a moment to fill out our post-show survey to rate this session. You can view that below. You will also be prompted to take the survey at the conclusion of the webinar. All right, that's it. So thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Sean, for another great presentation, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.